I remember that day like it was yesterday, even though I was only 5 years old. My name is Jenna, and that was the day my life changed forever. Dad had gone on another business trip, leaving Mom and me alone in our suburban house. I was playing with my dolls in the living room when I heard the doorbell ring. Mom rushed to answer it, her face lighting up as she saw who was there. "Jenna, honey, go to your room and play," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. I did as I was told, but curiosity got the better of me. I peeked around the corner and saw a tall man I didn't recognize. Mom was throwing clothes into a suitcase, moving faster than I'd ever seen her move before. Mom zipped up her suitcase and headed for the door. I stepped out of my hiding place, confused and scared. "Mommy, where are you going?" "I have to go away for a while, sweetie," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Be a good girl for Daddy, okay?" And just like that, she was gone. No hug, no kiss goodbye. Just the sound of a car engine starting and then fading away into the distance. I stood there, staring at the closed door, waiting for her to come back. But she didn't. The house felt bigger and emptier than ever before. As night fell, I grew more scared. I tried to turn on the lights, but I was too short to reach the switches. The darkness closed in around me, and I started to cry. "Mommy, Daddy." I called out, over and over again. But no one came. I don't know how many days passed. I was hungry and thirsty, and the dark seemed to be alive, full of monsters waiting to grab me. I cried until I had no tears left, then huddled in a corner, shaking with fear. Finally, I heard voices outside. Our neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, was talking to someone. "I've been hearing a child crying for days," she was saying. "I'm worried something might have happened." The door burst open, and suddenly the house was full of people. Policemen, neighbors, and finally, my dad. "Jen," he cried, scooping me up in his arms. "Oh God, Jenna, I'm so sorry." I clung to him, sobbing with relief. Over his shoulder, I saw a policeman holding a piece of paper. "Mr. Anderson," he said gravely. "I think you should read this." Dad set me down gently and took the note. As he read it, his face crumpled. He looked older suddenly, like he'd aged years in just a few moments. "She's gone," he whispered. "Linda's gone. She left us." The next few weeks were a blur. Dad took time off work to stay with me. We had lots of visitors, relatives, friends, and a nice lady who Dad said was a child psychologist. "Jenna's been through a traumatic experience," the psychologist explained to Dad. "It's normal for her to have some fears and anxieties after what happened." And boy, did I have fears. I couldn't sleep without a light on, the dark terrified me. And I panicked whenever Dad had to leave, afraid he wouldn't come back either. The fear never really went away. It became a part of me, as much a part of my identity as my brown hair or green eyes. Jenna Anderson, the girl whose mother left her, the girl afraid of the dark, the girl always worried about being abandoned. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, life settled into a new normal. Dad and I became a team of two, figuring out how to navigate this new world without Mom. He learned to braid my hair, badly at first, but he got better with practice, and I learned how to make his coffee just the way he liked it. That changed the day Dad met Helen. I was 7 years old when Dad introduced me to her. Helen had kind eyes and a warm smile that made me feel instantly at ease. Over the next few weeks, Helen became a regular presence in our lives. She didn't try to replace my mom, something I appreciated more than I could express. Instead, she carved out her own space in our little family. One day, I overheard Dad talking to her on the phone. "I think it's time, Helen. Will you move in with us?" Helen moved in a week later. She didn't try to be my mom, but she became something just as important, a friend. She helped me with my homework, braided my hair much better than Dad ever could, and always made sure there was a nightlight in my room. As the years passed, our lives changed in other ways too. Dad's company took off, and suddenly we were moving to a big new house in a fancy neighborhood. I got my own room with a walk-in closet and a view of the backyard pool. But some things didn't change. I still slept with a nightlight. I still worried every time Dad went on a business trip. And sometimes, late at night, I'd catch Dad looking at old photos of Mom. My 10th birthday started like any other day. I woke up to the smell of pancakes, Helen's special birthday tradition for me. Dad was home from work, and we were planning a small party later. Everything seemed perfect. Then the doorbell rang. As I walked into the living room, I froze. Standing there, looking older but unmistakable, was my mother. And next to her was a little girl, about 5 years old, clutching a teddy bear and looking around wide-eyed. "Linda," Dad said, his voice tight. "What are you doing here?" Mom took a deep breath. "Tom, I'm so sorry. For everything. I know I have no right to be here, but..." She gestured to the little girl. "This is Emma. She's your daughter." The room went silent. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Dad's face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, disbelief, and then, something else. "My daughter?" he repeated. Mom nodded. "I was pregnant when I left. I didn't know then, I swear. Tom, I've made so many mistakes. I'm not asking you to forgive me, but Emma, she deserves to know her father." I watched as Dad knelt down to the little girl's level. "Hi Emma," he said softly. I'm your dad." Emma looked up at him shyly. "Hi," she whispered. As Dad talked to Emma, I noticed Helen standing in the doorway, her face pale. She turned and walked away quickly. I wanted to follow her, but I felt rooted to the spot. The next few hours were a blur. There were lots of adult conversations I wasn't supposed to hear, raised voices, tears. I hid in my room, hugging my knees to my chest and trying to make sense of it all. Later that evening, Dad came to talk to me. "Jenna," he said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "I know this is a lot to take in. Your mom, she's made some big mistakes. But Emma, she's innocent in all this. She's your sister. I've decided to give your mom another chance. For Emma's sake." The next day, I watched from my window as Helen packed her car. She looked up and saw me watching. With tears in her eyes, she waved goodbye. I waved back, feeling like a part of me was leaving with her. Mom and Emma moved in that same day. Emma took the guest room, and Mom took her old place in Dad's room. It felt wrong, like she was erasing the last 5 years as if they never happened. The years that followed were complicated. Mom was back, but it wasn't the happy family reunion I might have dreamed of when I was younger. She doted on Emma, showering her with attention and affection. But with me, there was always a distance, an awkwardness that never quite went away. As for Emma, well, she was just a kid. She didn't ask to be born into this mess, and I tried not to resent her. But it was hard, especially when I saw how easily she fit into Mom and Dad's life, in a way I never seemed to. By the time I turned 18, I was more than ready to leave for college. I had chosen to study zoology. Animals had always been easier for me to understand than people. They didn't judge, didn't have complicated emotions or messy family histories. They just were. The day I left for college was bittersweet. Dad hugged me tight, his eyes misty. "I'm so proud of you, Jenna," he said. "You're going to do great things." Mom gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder. "Good luck," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Emma, now 13, rolled her eyes. "Finally get my own room," she muttered. I pretended not to hear her, focusing instead on Dad's warm embrace. College was freeing. For the first time, I was away from the tension at home, the constant reminder of my complicated family situation. I threw myself into my studies, finding solace in the world of animals and nature. But even as I excelled academically, I struggled socially. Years of feeling like an outsider in my own family had left their mark. I was quiet, reserved, always afraid of getting too close to people. What if they left, like Mom had? What if they replaced me, like Emma seemed to have done? Instead, I found comfort in the college's small zoo. I volunteered there in my spare time, caring for the animals. There was a particularly grumpy old llama named Larry who became my favorite. He didn't like most people, but he seemed to tolerate me. The years at college flew by, and before I knew it, I was graduating. As I stood in my cap and gown, diploma in hand, I scanned the crowd. Dad was there, beaming with pride. Mom and Emma were there too, clapping politely. "Congratulations, Jenna," Mom said stiffly. "Your father and I have been talking, and, well, we think it's time you started looking for your own place. You know, spread your wings." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I looked at Dad, hoping he'd contradict her, but he just looked away, his expression pained. "Right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course. I'll start looking right away." The days following my graduation were tense. I was back in my childhood home, but it felt anything but welcoming. Dad tried his best to make me feel comfortable, but Mom and Emma made it clear that I was an unwanted guest. "Jenna, have you started looking for jobs yet?" Mom would ask over breakfast, her tone falsely sweet. "You know, it's important to get your foot in the door early." Emma would chime in, "Yeah, and maybe you could find your own place too. It's getting kind of cramped around here." Nights were the hardest. I still needed my nightlight to sleep, a fact that didn't escape Emma's notice. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, she barged into my room. "Seriously?" she scoffed, pointing at my nightlight. "You're 22 and you still need that? No wonder you don't have any friends." I felt my cheeks burn with shame. "Leave me alone, Emma," I muttered. But Emma wasn't done. At dinner the next day, she brought it up again, this time in front of everyone. "Hey, Mom, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Don't you think Jenna should see a therapist or something? I mean, she's an adult who's afraid of the dark and can't make friends. That's not normal, right?" I felt something snap inside me. Years of pent-up hurt and anger came flooding out. "You want to know why I'm like this, Emma?" I said, my voice shaking. "It's because when I was 5, my mother left me alone in a dark, empty house for days. Do you have any idea what that does to a child?" The table went silent. Dad looked down at his plate, his face a mask of guilt and pain. Mom's eyes widened in shock, then quickly filled with tears. "How dare you?" she cried, her voice rising dramatically. "How can you be so cruel and vindictive? I've tried so hard to make amends, to be a family again, and this is how you repay me?" As Mom continued her tearful tirade and Emma smirked triumphantly, I realized something: I couldn't live here anymore. This wasn't my home, and these people, they weren't my family. Not really. From that day on, I threw myself into job hunting with renewed vigor. Then, finally, a glimmer of hope. I had an interview scheduled at a small wildlife rehabilitation center. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I left the house that morning feeling cautiously optimistic. But when I arrived, I found a hastily scribbled note on the door. "Interviews canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. We apologize for the inconvenience." Disappointed, I headed home earlier than expected. As I unlocked the front door, I heard voices coming from the living room. Mom and Emma, deep in conversation. I was about to announce my presence when I heard my name. "If Jenna wasn't around at all," Emma was saying. "I mean, it's not fair that she gets any of Dad's money. She's not even really part of this family." "I know, sweetie," Mom replied, her voice soothing. "But we have to be patient. Once she moves out, it'll be easier to convince your father to change his will. We just need to keep pushing her to leave." I felt like I'd been doused in ice water. They wanted me gone, not just from the house, but from the family entirely. And they wanted my inheritance too. As I sat on my bed, my mind raced. What should I do? Should I tell Dad? But would he believe me over Mom and Emma? He'd forgiven Mom for abandoning us, after all. He loved them. Maybe he'd take their side. My first stroke of luck came when I saw a job posting for the city zoo. They needed a zoologist to assist with their wildlife rehabilitation program. It wasn't a glamorous position, but it was exactly what I'd been trained for. I sent in my application immediately, and to my surprise and delight, I got called in for an interview. The day of the interview, I stood in front of the zoo's main gate, taking deep breaths to calm my nerves. The interview went better than I could have hoped. The head zoologist, Dr. Martinez, seemed impressed by my knowledge and passion. "You've got the job, Jenna," she said with a warm smile. "Welcome to the team." I could have cried with relief. Finally, something was going right. Working at the zoo was everything I'd hoped for and more. I spent my days caring for injured wildlife, educating visitors about conservation, and even assisting with research projects. In the evenings, I'd return to my tiny apartment, which I was able to rent with the money I saved. To combat the loneliness, I started participating in online forums for animal lovers and people with similar interests. That's where I met Jake. Jake was from the same city, shared my love for animals, and had a wicked sense of humor that made me laugh even on my toughest days. We started chatting regularly, sharing stories about our day and discussing everything from the latest conservation efforts to our favorite books. One day, Jake suggested we exchange photos. With trembling hands, I sent him a recent picture of me at the zoo. He responded with a photo of himself. He had kind eyes and a warm smile that made my heart skip a beat. But as much as I enjoyed our chats, the idea of meeting in person or even admitting my growing feelings terrified me. What if he rejected me once he got to know the real me? What if he left, just like Mom had? It was around this time that I started corresponding with Lily, a girl I met on a support forum for people with childhood trauma. She understood my fears in a way no one else had before. "You know what helps me?" Lily wrote one day. "I write emails to the people I can't talk to in real life. I pour out everything I'm feeling, all the things I wish I could say. But I don't send them, I just save them as drafts. It's really cathartic." Taking Lily's advice, I started writing emails to Dad. In them, I told him everything, about overhearing Mom and Emma's conversation, about how hurt I felt that he didn't seem to notice me anymore, about how I felt like an outsider in my own family. I started writing to Jake too. In these emails, I allowed myself to be vulnerable in a way I couldn't be in our chats. "Jake," I wrote, "I think I'm falling for you. But I'm scared. I'm scared of letting anyone get close to me. I'm scared of being hurt again." These emails too remained unsent, my feelings hidden away in the safety of my drafts folder. Dad called occasionally, his voice a mixture of concern and confusion. "Jenna, honey," he'd say, "why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? We miss you." Each time, I'd make up an excuse. "Sorry, Dad, I've got a big project at work," or "I'm not feeling well this week, maybe next time." It was just another Saturday afternoon. I was at the mall, picking up some essentials, when I heard a familiar voice call my name. "Jenna, is that you?" I turned around and there she was, Helen, my former stepmother. She looked older, but her kind eyes were just the same. Before I knew it, we were hugging, years of separation melting away in an instant. That's when I noticed the young boy standing beside her, looking up at us curiously. "This is my nephew, Mike," Helen explained, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "I'm raising him now. My sister, she passed away last year." Over coffee, Helen filled me in on her life. After she and Dad split up, she'd been on her own until her sister's death left Mike in her care. We started meeting regularly after that, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with Mike. One day Helen called and urgently asked to look after Mike. That evening, Mike arrived at my apartment, backpack in tow. As I prepared dinner in my tiny kitchen, I could hear him tapping away on my laptop in the living room. I'd told him he could play games if he finished his homework. When I came out of the kitchen with 2 plates of spaghetti, I found Mike looking guilty, his face pale. Jenna, he said, his voice trembling. I did something bad. I was curious, and I saw these emails in your drafts folder. And I sent them. All of them. I'm so sorry. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Those emails, my private thoughts, my deepest feelings, sent out into the world. To Dad. To Jake. I felt like I couldn't breathe. That night, after Mike left, I lay in bed, my mind racing. What would Dad think? And Jake, oh God, Jake. My phone pinged with a message notification. It was from Jake, but I couldn't bring myself to read it. What if he was disgusted by my feelings? What if he never wanted to speak to me again? I barely slept that night, tossing and turning, imagining all the worst-case scenarios. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Dad. Jenna, he said, his voice serious. We need to talk. Can you meet me at the cafe near your old high school? My heart pounded as I sat across from Dad in the small cafe. He looked tired, his face etched with lines I hadn't noticed before. I got your emails, he said quietly. Jenna, I had no idea you were feeling this way. About your mother, about Emma, about everything. I couldn't meet his eyes, shame and fear warring inside me. Jenna, look at me, Dad said, his voice gentle, but firm. I looked up, surprised to see tears in his eyes. I love you. More than anything in this world. I'm so sorry I made you feel like you weren't important to me. That was never, ever my intention. We talked for hours, really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. About Mom's return, about Emma, about how I'd felt pushed aside and forgotten. Dad listened, really listened, occasionally wiping away a tear. Finally, he stood up. I need some time to process all this, he said. But Jenna, we're going to figure this out. You and me, I promise. As I watched him walk away, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. What would happen now? But I didn't have much time to dwell on it because my phone rang again. It was Jake. Jenna, he said, his voice warm. I got your email. And I feel the same way. I'd been too scared to say it, but I really like you. Would you like to meet for coffee? My heart soared. Yes, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. I'd love to. The next day, I met Jake at a small coffee shop. He was even more handsome in person, with a kind smile that put me at ease immediately. We talked for hours about our fears, our dreams, our pasts. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen and understood. As autumn leaves began to fall, my phone rang one crisp morning. It was Dad. Jenna, he said, his voice warm but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. I'd like you to come to Thanksgiving dinner. It's important to me that you're there. Something in his tone made me agree. Thanksgiving Day arrived, and I stood on the doorstep of my childhood home, my heart pounding. Jake had offered to come with me for support, but I felt this was something I needed to face on my own. Mom opened the door, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Jenna, how nice of you to join us. Emma, lounging on the couch, barely looked up from her phone. Oh, you came. Dad emerged from the kitchen, enveloping me in a warm hug. I'm glad you're here, sweetheart, he whispered. As we sat down to dinner, the tension was palpable. Mom and Emma exchanged glances, their smiles strained and artificial. Dad, however, seemed oddly calm. Just as Mom began to serve the turkey, Dad cleared his throat. Before we begin, there's something we need to discuss. He reached down beside his chair and pulled out a thick manila folder. Dad began pulling out documents, laying them on the table. Linda, Emma, I've known for a while that something wasn't right. So I did some investigating. He held up a bank statement. First, I discovered regular withdrawals from our accounts that I didn't make. Quite substantial amounts, in fact. Mom's face paled. Emma suddenly found her plate very interesting. Then, Dad continued, pulling out another document. I hired a private investigator. Linda, he provided photographic evidence of your encounters with a certain gentleman at the Rosewood Hotel. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tom, I can explain. But Dad wasn't finished. He pulled out one final document, his hand shaking slightly. And finally, I had a DNA test done. Emma isn't my biological daughter. The room fell silent. Emma's phone clattered to the floor. Mom looked like she might faint. I've already spoken to my lawyer, Dad said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Linda, I'm filing for divorce. And I'm afraid I'll have to ask both you and Emma to leave this house. Mom found her voice, anger replacing shock. You can't do this. I'll take you for everything you've got. Dad's expression hardened. Actually, Linda, you won't. If you try to claim any property, I'll countersue for fraud and demand repayment of all the money you've taken, plus what I've spent raising Emma. My lawyer assures me I have a very strong case. Tears streamed down Mom's face as the reality of the situation sank in. Emma sat in stunned silence, her world crumbling around her. In the days that followed, Mom and Emma moved out. Dad and I began to rebuild our relationship, stronger than ever before. We had weekly dinners, long talks, and even started planning a father-daughter road trip. One day, over coffee, Dad hesitantly brought up Helen. I'd been thinking a lot about the past, he said. About the mistakes I made. I reached out to Helen to apologize. We'd been meeting for coffee, talking things through. I smiled, genuinely happy for him. That's wonderful, Dad. Helen is an amazing woman. As for me, things with Jake were going better than I could have ever imagined. He was patient, kind, and understood my fears and insecurities. With his support, I was even starting to work through my issues in therapy.